On July 20th, 1969, an estimated 600 million people, a fifth of everyone alive, watched a man step onto the moon. It was the most watched live broadcast in human history, and it looked terrible. A smeared, ghostly figure moving through static. But here's the thing. At that exact moment, a far clearer picture of Neil Armstrong existed. A crisp one. It was arriving at tracking stations on Earth in real time. The world just never saw it. And within about a decade, the only high-quality recording of it would be deliberately erased by the very agency that made it. You may have heard they taped over it with soap operas. That's not what happened. What actually happened is somehow worse. To understand what was lost, you first have to understand why the broadcast looked so bad in the first place. The camera mounted on the lunar module could not transmit normal television. Normal TV runs at about 30 frames a second, with hundreds of interlaced lines, and it needs a fat radio channel to carry all that data. The lunar module didn't have the bandwidth to spare. Power and weight were everything, so engineers used a stripped-down format called slow-scan television. Apollo's camera sent just 10 frames per second, at 320 lines, scanned straight down the screen. By the standards of the equipment, the raw slow-scan image was actually clean and stable. There was just one enormous problem. No television set anywhere on Earth could display it, not a single one. So NASA had to convert it, and the way they did it, in 1969, was breathtakingly crude. The raw slow-scan signal was fed into a high-quality 10-inch video monitor. Then they pointed an ordinary television camera directly at that monitor and refilmed the screen. That refilmed image is what got beamed to the networks, and then to the entire world. Read that again. The footage that 600 million people saw was a television camera filming a photograph of another screen. Every flaw of the monitor, every bit of glare, every loss of contrast, baked in permanently. And it got worse. During Armstrong's first steps, the station handling the feed had its contrast and vertical settings configured wrong. He was, in the words of the engineers, barely visible. The single most important moment of the 20th century, and somebody had the brightness knob in the wrong place. Now here's the part that turns this from a technical footnote into a tragedy. While the degraded version was being broadcast to the planet, the raw slow-scan signal, the clean one, before it was ruined by filming a monitor, was being recorded directly onto magnetic data tape at the tracking stations that received it. Goldstone in California, Honeysuckle Creek, and the Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia. Those tapes were the unconverted, undegraded, highest quality record of the first moonwalk that would ever exist. People who later saw frames pulled from that raw feed described them as dramatically sharper than anything the public ever watched. The tapes were boxed up and shipped to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and then they were put on a shelf. Because the broadcast had worked and the mission was over, nobody decided the originals were worth protecting. They just became boxes, in an archive, among hundreds of thousands of others. Fast forward to the early 1980s. NASA has a problem that has nothing to do with the moon. Its satellites, especially the Landsat program photographing the entire surface of the Earth, are generating staggering amounts of data. These satellites record around the clock, 7 days a week. And they record onto the exact same kind of magnetic tape that the Apollo recordings used. Magnetic tape was expensive, and there was a severe shortage of it. So NASA did the responsible, efficient, bureaucratic thing. It had a standing policy. Old tapes that were no longer considered important would be pulled from the archive, run through a degausser to wipe them clean, and reused. Somewhere in the queue of old, no longer important data sat more than 700 boxes of Apollo-era tapes, including the moonwalk. Nobody flagged them. Nobody pulled them aside. They went through the machine like everything else. This is the part the internet loves to get wrong. You'll read that NASA recorded over the moon landing with soap operas. That somewhere there's a tape with a daytime drama sitting right on top of Neil Armstrong. It's a fantastic story. It is also not true. The truth is more mundane and honestly more damning. The tapes weren't reused for entertainment. They were reused for satellite data. Images of farmland, coastlines, forests, and weather captured by Landsat. The single most significant video humanity has ever recorded was wiped to make room for routine pictures of the Earth's surface. Not out of malice, not even out of stupidity, out of efficiency. A line item, a reel that needed to be free, and a moonwalk that nobody in that moment thought to defend. For decades, no one even realized the originals were gone. Then, in the late 1990s, some sharper-than-usual frames resurfaced, and a few people started asking where the high-quality tapes actually were. In the early 2000s, a small team of retired NASA engineers and contractors began hunting for them in earnest. Among them, Richard Nafzger of Goddard and Stan Lebar, the engineer who had actually designed the Apollo lunar camera. He went looking for the footage his own camera had captured. They searched for years. Archives, warehouses, records at Goddard, the National Archives. In 2006, NASA was still publicly hopeful the tapes were simply misplaced somewhere in the system. They weren't. On July 16, 2009, the 40th anniversary of the launch, NASA admitted the conclusion the search had reached. The original tapes had been erased and reused in the early 80s. They were not lost. They were gone. There was nothing left to find. And yet, this is not entirely a story about loss. Remember, the live broadcast was never gone. It survived on kinescope films and old broadcast tapes that had been sitting safely in archives the whole time. So NASA hired Blurry Digital, the Hollywood firm that restores classic films, to take the best surviving copies and clean them up. They finished in December 2009. The restored footage is, ironically, clearer than what anyone watched in 1969. Though still a copy of a copy, never the pristine original that was erased. So we didn't lose the moment. We lost the best version of the moment, permanently, because at no single point did protecting it become anyone's job. And that's the real lesson, and it isn't really about NASA. We assume that the most important things are automatically safe. That someone somewhere is keeping the master copy. Usually, no one is. History doesn't survive by default. It survives because somebody decides it's worth saving before the reel gets reused. I'm Bobo. Subscribe.